Hey, it's Emily. So here's the thing. I have spent 3 days trying to recover this audio. Frankly, everything about this guy has been a fucking mess. It started in my research where I had typed up everything and somehow completely lost it and had to start completely over from scratch. And then during the recording, I had a panic attack and then I lost the entire audio file. And like I said, I've spent 3 days recovering it. And once it was recovered, I was only able to recover my audio and not Lindsey's and Tori's. So that is all to say. I am sorry about the sound of this one. I'm going to do my best to make it sound good. But the entire process on this guy, the research, the recording, and the edit has been such a shit show. I have this weird, creepy feeling in my body that now that he's dead, he doesn't want this story told. And I hope he doesn't want his story told, because I'm going to tell the fuck out of it. All right? So, without further ado, enjoy the episode.
Hello and welcome. What the fuck? We'll just restart that. Here we go. Hello and welcome to Three's a Crime, a true crime podcast. I'm Tori.
I'm Emily.
And I'm Lindsey.
And that's our intro.
Here we are professional podcasters.
We're podcasters, bitches.
I was digging a hole in my backyard for tomatoes the other day, and all I could think about was how difficult it would be to bury a body and how I would just lose patience halfway through and say, fuck this, I'm so done. I couldn't do it.
She was telling me this earlier, and I was like, I think that's why so many people get buried in shallow graves.
Yeah.
People get like halfway done, and they're like, fuck, this is a lot of work.
Exhausted.
We're talking about Joseph Edward Duncan III. So the reason that I wanted to do this one is because, well, first of all, I just want to say that I wrote these notes twice, and I worked on them for like 3 days.
Poor girl. Where the fuck
is Spokane again.
It's because we're recording on Saturday.
It always
Janky
happens.
Truckman couldn't make it, so he said a can.
Janky truck man. So, I fucking had to write these notes 3 times because our beautiful patrons bought us a new hard drive because my poor little Mac laptop like could not handle everything that was in there.
It's a legit tiny little.
Yeah, I bought it specifically because it's like iPad-ish sized. So I had to get a hard drive so that I could put all the audio files on there. And anyway, somehow
and audio files are huge.
They're huge. It takes up a lot of space. So thanks to all of our patrons for buying me that. Thanks for that in Costco. Costco sponsor us. But I accidentally deleted all my notes. So I had to redo it all yesterday.
Oh, she was like...
She was not a happy woman. And the can is just...
That's how her, yeah, I was gonna say that's how her soul felt.
Like you picture like empty a tumbleweed, now you just picture like an empty can flying across the street.
A bird cawing in the...
But I wanted to do this because this motherfucker, the victim that lived through this, is my age, and this happened in Coeur d'Alene. So we were like in the same age group. So when it was happening, it was like...
So wait, the victim that survived is the age that you are now, or is the age, like, you guys are the same age now?
Well, it'd be the same. Oh, no. Sorry. Like, we went to elementary school together.
Oh.
Sorry, is what I'm saying. I want to give a major trigger warning. There's no animals, but a lot of crimes against kids. Buckle up, friends. And I also wanted to shout out True Crime Queen, which is who I listened to for this. I just typed in the dude's name and listened to like multiple podcasts. So the way that I do my research is I find like Murderpedia is a really good one because it's organized, and I kind of find like a general timeline, and then I'll read different articles for different pieces of information that weren't in the original and do the same with podcasts, and then kind of like add those into where I think they fit in the story. I have like 100 tabs open at all time and like a podcast going.
Yeah, Murderpedia is great, and I find that I have a need to, like, when I'm researching and writing, like, the first step for me is to write a timeline.
Yeah, I
I
have
to have the timeline.
I don't know where to start except
And
at the
then,
beginning.
Yeah,
That's how I do
and
it,
then fill in the details kind of in between for each actual one.
And I know that some people, after watching Bailey Sarian, I know that some people don't like to know those things, but you know what? We're going to talk about the past of even the killers because I think that it goes into who they are.
Yeah,
as people.
she
I
goes
think it's
into
totally
that
relevant.
frequently,
And I'm
I
sorry
need
if you
the
don't like it.
backstory.
I prefer to know
Same.
what happened.
So
And if you don't like it, I don't care.
The way they are.
And here's the thing. If you don't want to hear the backstory, fast forward. But for the rest of us...
Click the little 15-second forward button.
Yeah.
I wanted to shout out True Crime Queen. The girl on there has a 2-part episode about it. She does Pacific Northwest crimes also. So if you want like the real in-depth one, go listen to that one. Her name is Ginger, and she lives in the valley. I didn't know she lived here.
Right, yeah. And
Hi, Ginger.
Since you are local, we want to do a collab.
Okay. Joseph Edward Duncan. He was born February 25th, 1963 in Tacoma, Washington. He grew up in a military family, so they moved about every 2 years. He only completed high school until his sophomore year. After he didn't return after winter break, he just like stopped going, I guess. I don't really know. And then I put this in a question mark because I read somewhere like apparently it's because he got arrested, but like I couldn't find like why he was arrested or anything about that. So he didn't return after winter break of his sophomore year. His GPA in the 10th grade was a 1.7. So like he had a super low GPA. And the reason that I say that is because he is very intelligent. So he's one of 5 children, but when they interviewed them later, they all kind of had like different ideas of what their childhood was like. So one of his brothers said like their childhood was great. They were in the Boy Scouts. They constantly went to church. Like they didn't have any weird things with their family. But then there was a daughter who said like the total opposite. She said, it was at a hearing in 2013 to establish Duncan's mental competency. She said that they had grown up with a super abusive mother. She said that while her dad was deployed in the military, she would like tell them how terrible they were. But he seems to think that his brother, who said none of those things are true, as actually like a traumatic response. He's like, no, those things totally happened. I think he's just pushing it out of his brain. But it's worth noting. So his first recorded crime was in 1978 when he was 15. I knew the story, the Coeur d'Alene part of the story. I didn't know all the background stuff. So his first crime was in 1978. He was 15 years old. This nasty mofo
raped a 9-year-old at gunpoint.
Wow.
And then the following year, when he was 16, he was also arrested driving a stolen car. And his parents were like, I can't fucking handle this. So they sent him to Dislin's Boy Ranch in Tacoma. I Googled this place. Immediately, sexual abuse charges came up. As soon as I typed it into Google, I was like, okay.
Ugh.
It said there were allegations of widespread sexual abuse in the 80s and 90s. And this is a random side note that I was very excited about. But everyone I told was not excited, so maybe it's not that cool. But you guys remember the movie A Christmas Story?
Yes.
You know the dad with the leg lamp.
Yes.
His name is William Richardson. His actor name is Darren McGavin. His real name is William Richardson. He was born in Spokane in 1922.
Wow.
And I'm going to tell you how I came to that conclusion.
I wore that lampshade on my head one year for a Halloween costume because I went as a one-night stand.
That is clever. So I was Googling Dislin's Boys Ranch, and I found these articles about Darren McGavin because he went to Dislin's boys ranch in the 30s during the Great Depression.
Oh my
And
God.
then I started
was he
stalking
like a
him
bad-
and then found out that he just happened to be born in Spokane. He was born and raised here before he moved to Hollywood.
Wow.
Isn't that
That's
cool?
crazy.
That is neat. I
Like,
didn't know
what a
that.
random little fact that I would have,
Yeah.
like, never known. So, now we're back to Duncan. A bunch of the stuff that he talks about is stuff that he tells investigators after he's, like, been caught.
Yeah. I mean,
Trigger
we only
alert.
get
What's it called? Spoiler alert. He gets caught. Okay. So he tells the police that the ranch, the boys' ranch, is where he starts to get really skewed views about sexuality. I've heard that there was like a man that lived nearby who like, you know, invited him over and did weird stuff. But then like I only heard that in like one place, so I don't know if it's accurate or not. But at Dislin's Boys Ranch, he had to have like a regular therapist. When Duncan was seeing the therapist, he had told the therapist that he estimated that he had raped 13 boys by the time he was 16 years old.
Now, is he identifying as like homosexual at this point? Because the only reason that I'm asking is he obviously has a preference for boys as victims,
Yeah.
but you know, we all know that rape is not about sex, it's
Yeah, it's
about
not about
power.
Yeah.
But I just wondered if he had identified as.
It didn't say, I mean, I assume because of this, but like he started so young that I don't think there was ever really like a. Remember, his first reported one was in 1978 when he was 15. So in 1980, when he was 17, he's again arrested after breaking into a neighbor's house and stealing 4 pistols, 1,000 rounds of ammo, porn magazines, and the dude's car. So he steals the dude's car and he's just like driving around doing whatever the fuck a 17-year-old kid does. And he decides that he is going to find someone to rape. And he decides to force a 14-year-old boy into the car with him. He says he was actually looking for a girl, but he couldn't find one. So he settled for a boy.
Oh.
So here's something really gross. He actually has a blog, had a blog. And he says, quote, "As an adult, some 30 years later, this boy testified at my death penalty sentencing trial that this was by far the most painful and terrifying experience of his life. At the time, I thought I was being nice to him and maybe even teaching him some fun things." He also says that he considers the boy lucky that he lived to such a life where the worst thing that had happened to him was this, considering all that Joseph Duncan had been through.
Are you serious, bro?
Wow.
Nope, we're done.
Duncan was charged with the rape and was sentenced to a maximum of 20 years. And beforehand, he had to attend sexual offender treatment from the Western State Mental Hospital in Washington State. Before prison, too, he was sent to do the sexual offender treatment. So, in 1982, while he's like I don't know how long this treatment was, but long enough to where he had to like go stay there. He's almost caught on the grounds of the mental hospital peeping into women's windows. So 2 weeks into the sentence in the mental hospital, he asked to leave and he wants to complete the extra time in prison. On his blog, he said his mother was being sexually harassed by a scumbag counselor at the mental hospital, and the man would later deem him a sexual psychopath and untreatable, which at the time, at 17, that is like a super strong like diagnosis. He would be categorized very harshly as an adult sex offender at 17. In the first few years of his prison sentence, he started focusing on... You'd think he'd focus on like the day he can get out so he can like be free. Be free and like live life, man. No. Nay, dear friends, nay. He wanted to be free so that he could get back at the corrupted prison system and those who support it. So his earliest chance at parole would be in 1987 when he was 24. This was denied because he needed a place to live and he only had a few classes left to finish his GED and his associates, and they were just like, no, you're not being paroled. The following year, his mom actually writes to the parole board and says, as a result of his liberal father's influence, he committed the prior crimes, despite her very Christian efforts of raising a good, law-abiding citizen. This motion was also denied. And then at some point, he convinces some random dude named David Wolfert from Linford. David Wolfert from Linwood, Washington,
Linwood.
to start writing fuck. At some point, he convinces some random guy named David Wolfert to fuck!
Live in
Fuck!
Linwood.
Some random dude named David from Linwood, Washington.
Yay,
Okay?
Wolfert.
God. So he convinces this dude, I'm gonna punch you in the face. He convinces this dude to write a fucking letter on his behalf, okay? Listen. Okay. Oh my God. He's been like pen pals with this guy since 1991. He has like this weird history of being able to get men to do things for him. He talked to the parole board and insisted that Duncan was a changed man and was no longer a threat to society. The dude even loaned him $3,000 to pay rent at his halfway house upon his granted parole release in 1994. So he kind of had like a history of sugar daddies.
You $3,000. Do you know what I mean, though?
Like some random dude in prison.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not true. If you needed it for something, we're close enough, like, I would. But I wouldn't, like... Do you know what I mean? Like, somebody that I don't really know?
Yeah,
like,
no.
$3,000, just like, here, use this to pay your rent.
So, court records show that Duncan and David at some point had been in a sexual relationship. So, he got himself a little bit of a sugar daddy. Okay. So, it was in court records that they had had a sexual relationship. At 31, Duncan is released on parole for good behavior. I fucking hate that. Anytime people get released on good behavior... And it's for such a crime as, like, raping someone. Like, fuck you.
Yeah, no.
Like, fuck you.
I feel like it's such a slap.
It's a slap in the fucking
to
face.
The victims, I feel like.
At 31, Duncan is released on parole for good behavior from the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla after only serving 14 of his 20-year sentence. He has some major dark plans for his retaliation against society. However, he was a model parolee. He was living in a halfway house and working 2 jobs. He had, like, kind of a long-term girlfriend, but she was married. Which is not, like, necessarily an important piece of the information, but apparently she was married. And she was, like, also dating this dude. So when I say he's a model parolee, it's also, like, he would admit to, like, harmless parole violations. At one point, he moved his brother's handgun off of his desk, so when he saw his parole officer, he'd be like, I just want you to know, I moved I moved a gun that was on a desk, so, like...
I did touch a gun.
If you ask me if I touched a gun, it's gonna, you know... Yeah.
Yeah, he admits to the minor ones to cover up the major
Correct,
ones.
yeah.
And build trust where there shouldn't be.
Yeah. So one night he goes out for ice cream, presumably with his girlfriend. But he is, like, sitting in his car. I don't know if they, like, met there maybe, and she, like, left. And he's, like, sitting in his car finishing his ice cream. And these 2 girls walk by the car. Sammy Jo White and Carmen Cubias come walking by the car. And he's inside it, eating his ice cream in the dark like a fucking creep.
I just hate these wrong place,
Yeah.
wrong time.
You see it coming.
I know you want to yell at the TV screen.
Yes.
No, turn around. Yeah. He sees them walking and he immediately, like, ditches the ice cream. And he decides to confront the girls. And so he walks up to them. He's, like, sees them walking around. They go away for a little while, like, behind a building. And then they come back around. And a bunch of them are, like, abandoned buildings. He confronts them, saying he's the owner of the property. And he starts saying, like, what the fuck are you doing here? This is my property. He basically asks all the right questions to make them think that he's an authority figure. And these are, like, young girls. Yeah. He basically is, like, scaring them shitless. And he's like, well, we're gonna, like, I'm in a normal car. I'm not in my patrol car. I'm in my normal car. And I'm gonna, like, teach you guys a lesson. So get in the back of my car.
Ew.
And drives them to an abandoned barn in Bothell, Washington, which, again, is on the west side. He actually found this barn while he was just, like, driving around one day on his lunch break, which I always hate that. He attempted and failed to rape the girls in the barn. I do not have any more information on that, except that he failed to rape them. Instead, he killed them, he says, as cleanly and quickly as possible.
Nah, I thought these 2 were gonna survive. Where you're like, he failed to rape them.
No,
and
sorry.
I thought they got away.
He admits to returning to the barn the following day to hide their bodies. He then used their bodies for sexual purposes after digging a half-assed grave. He then partially dismembered one of the girls so that her body would fit more compactly in the hole.
Wow.
He finished the shallow grave, covered it with old wood, and leaves them for 2 years before their skeletons are discovered, and the case ends up going cold after that. So he's also a necrophiliac.
What
Great.
is the deal? What is
I
the
don't
deal
know.
with
And some,
necrophilia?
I know.
And why are so many of them into that?
The day after the murders, they're two half-sisters, and they end up being reported missing in Seattle. They had last been seen walking to the store for cigarettes and to do some panhandling. At one point, Duncan was living with a roommate because he was in a halfway house. His roommate was posting the missing persons flyers for the two girls. And Duncan, while he was doing it, Duncan, laughed at him, scoffed, and said that the girls in the photos looked like, quote, gangbangers. And said that it was a waste of time.
Ew.
Yeah, so it always creeps me out when people do that, when they're part of a missing person search or something for someone. I can't. That makes me just want to die. Mm-hmm. So again, that case goes cold. They actually don't link it to him until all the other stuff. After some time passes, he starts targeting families looking for more children to abduct. At one point, he even follows a woman and her two boys home from Target and watches their house for a few hours before deciding to go through a backsliding door. The mother and the two boys were in bed in the mother's bed together, watching TV. He forces the mother into the living room, and while he's trying to not be a bitch and hit her with a hammer so he can abduct her kids, amazingly, her husband comes home.
Oh, wow.
So he starts unlocking the door, and he panics and freaks out and leaves. So he's literally trying to find parents with kids to kill the parents and then kidnap the kids, which is fucking bleh, bleh. And he was watching her for a while. He followed her home and hung out for a few hours, which also just gives me the heebs. So her husband comes home. He bounces out the backsliding door and ditches the whole thing.
I'm thinking about how many actions we do a day, going to Target, going here or there, and knowing
you don't think
that
someone's
these
watching
people were just doing their daily things, not thinking
Living their life,
anything,
taking care of their kids.
and they're being literally
Targeted.
hunted. Yeah.
He never hears about this incident in the local news, so he kind of assumes that this might be the home of a Seattle-based cop who just wouldn't want it out in the media. Was never talked about. He keeps smoking a whole bunch of weed while he's on parole. He keeps not passing random UAs because he's full of weed. So, in a final fuck you, he quits both jobs, switches cars with his girlfriend, and drives to Oregon, where he becomes a federal fugitive after leaving the state of Washington. Lindsey just spit her coffee across the table.
Onto Tori.
Oh,
It was a premature
all over her
Jackson.
notes. He switches cars with his girlfriend and drives to Oregon, where he becomes a federal fugitive, and that's when she spit her coffee everywhere. So while in Oregon, he decides to drive through California to abduct another child. He's just kind of driving down the West Coast.
I mean, there's nothing like being a fugitive and then being you know what,
On a road
my
trip.
Number
on
bucket
bucket
list, yeah.
on the run bucket list.
In his blog, he states, quote, "I targeted almost every child I spotted out in the open and passed over many after stalking them briefly when I determined that they were not quite vulnerable enough because there were too many people around, too many threats, or just too difficult for me to get control over them." What you kind of find is this final fuck you is he knows if he does it, he's going to go to prison, so he's just
Getting it all done.
getting it all done.
Thing, though.
On April 14th, 1997, Joseph walks up to a group of young boys in Riverside County, California, asking to help find his lost cat. He actually shows up with a picture of a cat that he had once for this
That's
purpose.
how people would get me.
That's how people
I
would
was
get me
just
too.
gonna say,
If they were
fuck.
probably
Yeah.
not a cat, but if they were hey, have you seen my dog? There have been several criminal minds that start out that way. And I'm just yeah, I would totally be
I would totally be yeah,
sure,
where
of
is
course
it?
I will
Yeah.
come help you
Yeah.
look for
Yeah.
your dog.
Yeah. So the kids don't fall for his stupid ass antics and refuse to help. But then he pulls out his wallet and offers them money. At which point, one of the boys moves toward him to take the money. And 10-year-old Anthony Martinez, kind of moves between them. I think he kind of was ugh, well, ugh, trying to, protect the other kid that I believe was his brother his little brother. And in like getting between them, Joseph Duncan has a knife and he like takes the kid and like throws him in the back of his car. The boys were able to have a sketch done of Joseph Duncan and it was immediately released to the media. 2 weeks later, a park ranger noticed a group of vultures and found the boys' partially decomposed remains. He was found 70 miles away from his home in a ravine. He was nude, bound with duct tape, and his skull had been crushed. Joseph claims to later leave a souvenir package not far from the ravine, but he eventually, I guess, went back to get it, and this package contained what he said were Polaroids of the boys' abduction, as well as the knife used to force him to comply. Like I said, police never found it because he said he went and got it, so I don't know. Duncan said that when he told him he was going to have to kill him, Anthony said that he believed in God, so he knew he would go to heaven. So Sammy Joe White, Carmen Cubias, and Anthony Martinez's case would all go cold, and Joseph wouldn't be linked to them until his own confessions years later. So Duncan was actually arrested in Kansas and returned to prison in 1997 after violating the terms of his parole because he was constantly stoned. So while he's on parole, he's killing people. Right? And, like, that's not even what he goes back to prison for. He's transferred to Spokane, and in September of 1997, his parole officer gets a call from a Dr. Richard Waxman. Wax, like whack. W-A-C-K-S. Yeah, I Googled Waxman, and the internet was like, I don't know what you're fucking trying to figure out. And he was from Fargo, North Dakota. So this is Sugar Daddy number 2. Sugar Daddy Dos. So his parole officer gets a call from Dr. Richard Waxman in Fargo, North Dakota, who claims to have met Joseph years earlier. He told him that he met them in a coffee shop, but Joseph Duncan was like, no, I met him at a gay bar. He goes on to offer his own family's home as a halfway house upon Duncan's possible upcoming parole. And here's the motherfucking kicker. This dude had kids in the house.
No.
He had a wife and kids in the house, and he offered his house for him to stay. And the parole board is like, no.
They're children.
They're like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, he's in prison for raping kids. Hello. On February 10th, 1998, the skeletal remains of 11-year-old Sammy Joe White and 9-year-old Carmen Cubias, they were found in the abandoned barn where he had left them 2 years prior. A woman living in Bothell, Washington later comes forward and recalls seeing a now convicted Joseph coming into a grocery store she worked at. He often came in with a little girl who she now realized was Carmen. There was no clear cause of death for the girls because they were skeletal. However, they did have crushed skulls, so obviously they were hit with some type of blunt force object. But it led them to believe that that was probably a homicide. The case would remain cold for 9 years. In 2000, he's officially released in Spokane, Washington. He was given a bus ticket to Tacoma, where his mother lived, which is just on the other side of the state, close to Seattle. He immediately moves to Fargo, North Dakota to be with his weird married/bisexual sugar daddy too. He gets on a few dating sites where there's many photos of him looking super creepy provocative with makeup and dressed in women's clothing. I am not here to kink shame. I am here to murder shame because I fucking hate this guy. Yeah. So fuck him and his makeup and his fucking face and his dick and all parts of who he is as a person can suck my balls. So
love it.
Fuck that guy.
True.
So if you want to look up the beautiful photos of him as a woman, his name is Jazzy Jet. Wow. Gross. In 2004, Joseph goes to a playground in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, and lures away 2 young boys and molests them in the bushes. It's at this point, so in 2004, he starts his own stupid blog because he thinks that people give a fuck about what he thinks.
That was something else I was thinking, like, Jesus, that's not common.
And he writes, it's pretty creepy when you can read it all. It's out there. It's out there online still. One of the things that he focuses on in his blog, he has like a lot of rants on there. The more you read it, the more you kind of start to get into his brain of where he was at mentally, which was not
doesn't sound
where we all are. So on February 17th, 2005, he writes, quote, as long as we keep attacking the symptoms of social disease, the so-called offenders, then our problems will keep getting worse. Someday society will be forced to wake up and recognize how it propagates its own misery by denying the truth that criminals are victims too. In another post, he states, the only cure for crime is love. Everything else is just more crime. That's about as deep as a motherfucking puddle.
Get out of here.
On April 5th, 2005, he's charged with a $15,000 bond because of the creepy molestation of the 2 kids in the bushes. On his April 15th, 2005 entry titled, "The Boogeyman Will Get You," Duncan begins talking about his pending charges. Quote, So I've been accused of molesting a little boy. Those close to me know I didn't do it, of course. How could I? I'm not even a pedophile. Well, I'm not a psychopath either. I feel the full force and pain of everyone I've ever hurt, but that doesn't stop me from doing what I need to do. Ultimately, my feelings don't matter. I learned that in prison. I have to carry out my orders, or a lot worse than just me dying could happen. He then immediately calls Dr. Waxman, who immediately sends him $6,000 to pay an attorney. So he calls Dr. Waxman. He's like, bro, I have a $15,000 bond. And he's like, dude, I'll send you $6,000 for an attorney. He's like, sweet. So somehow at this point, he also has a third sugar daddy.
What
The first one's gone now, but now we have Dr. Waxman, and now we have a guy named Joe Crary, who writes Duncan a check for $15,000 to cover the bail. Instead, Duncan takes the money and skips bail and bounces again. So he knows he's going to get caught and go back to prison. So he decides that he just wants to keep doing all this terrible shit, but this time he's going to do the worst thing imaginable. He gets more money from one of the sugar daddies. I've lost track of how much money he's getting. He's driving around a rented red Jeep Cherokee, which is the fucking dumbest thing I've ever heard because he thinks it's an inconspicuous car, like a fucking dunce. So I literally wrote because he's a fucking dunce. He's a fucking idiot. Who gets a red Jeep and is like, yes. Yes, this seems like idiot.
Well, not to mention that he rented a vehicle, which is, there's usually LoJack and all kinds of tracking on rental cars. He would have been better off stealing a car.
So he's driving around this red Jeep, but he is on the run. So he starts stealing license plates from other cars. So at this point, the Jeep is also stolen. He stops at multiple stores in multiple towns where he buys a bunch of super fucking creepy things. 2 camcorders, telephoto lens, an Xbox game, which if anyone was wondering, it was Half-Life 2.
Oh no.
A radar detector, night vision binoculars, water, Pringles, trash bags, hair coloring, and a heart rate monitor. As of April 28th, the federal warrant for the arrest of Joseph Duncan has now been issued. In Casper, Wyoming, a log is found with a message carved into it saying, quote, "Deep in my dungeon, I welcome you here," signed with his inmate number from Washington State Penitentiary. There's no proof that it's his, but he drove all over the country and it kind of fits into where. Yeah, so they think it's probably from him. This fucking idiot, this fucking loser canoozer. I just made that up. It was really good. This loser canoozer is a fucking idiot and didn't think the GPS would be tracked in a rented car because he's a fucking dunce. Idiot. He needs one of those big caps that says dunce on it. He's a fucking dumbass. I literally say, so we can see where you went, you fucking imbecile. I'm laughing because I forgot I put that. There were multiple points in numerous states with stopping points near children's bus stops, parks. They've seen that you've driven all over the country and stopped at the creepiest of fucking places. There is a Reddit article about a woman who says that she believes that Joseph Duncan was actually spying on her and her sisters one evening in her home while he was driving around the West Coast evading police looking for children to abduct. She states that during a sleepover at her home in Missoula, which is only a couple hours away from here, she saw what she thought was deer walking outside her window, which, again, we live in the Pacific Northwest. That's not unusual. Yeah. But she saw that the deer had green eyes and she thought maybe it was a reflection.
I don't like that. How close are you to see the eyes of
it was the binoculars that he was using. The night vision binoculars.
This makes me feel icky.
Doesn't it make you feel so exposed? I know. The girls start screaming because they look and they're like, oh my god, those are fucking lights. Those aren't eyes. And they start screaming and he immediately runs. The GPS device recovered.
Fucking coward.
Don't
get me wrong.
He's a bitch. He's a bitch.
He's totally. And I was thinking when you were talking that I wonder if for him, if perhaps he wasn't a pedophile in the fact that children weren't necessarily his sexual preference as much as they were easier to control than an adult person.
Because he's a bitch.
Yeah.
And he's
Yeah.
he's not a large man necessarily. He's just kind of like a tall, skinny white guy.
And please understand that when we say he's a little bitch, we're not saying like you're not a real man. You weren't raping and murdering adults. It's just like
He's a coward and he sucks and we hate him and everything he does is terrible. The GPS device recovered from Duncan after his arrest shows multiple points of interest around the location, which makes her story plausible. They're like, yeah, we do actually think that's exactly what happened. After Montana, he's almost to Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, which we talked about is like 30 minutes away from here. He stops at a lodge on the way to stake out children and also possible camping areas when he notices a young girl and her mom sunbathing on their porch. Shasta, 8, and her mom, 40-year-old Brenda Groene. He actually turns the car around to get like a better look at them.
Gross.
And he realized basically like this is the exact situation like he had been looking for. He notes the location on his GPS and heads to a Spokane South Hill coffee shop to use the interwebs. When you used to have to go to a coffee shop to use the internet and blog to your
Internet cafe.
5 listeners. Yeah, 5 listeners. Readers. In his final blog post, he writes, quote, "Despite my actions, I'm not a bad person. I just have a disease contracted from society and it hurts a lot. I hope to complete this journal before I die or turn myself in. I still might do that. I think it's the right thing, but of course I'm not sure. Speak of being sure, I wish I could be sure about my thoughts, but right now the only thing I'm sure about is that I'm sure about nothing. It's not a good position to be considering my circumstances, being a felony fugitive and all." While at this coffee shop, he notices a mother and her son in front of a duplex with a for rent sign, and her son is there with her without a shirt on, and he's like fucking around with the sign like one of those people on the side roads, or like on the Jiffy Lube people is what I'm thinking. As the mother is showing Duncan around the duplex, because he goes up there and he's like, "Hey, I saw your for rent sign. I'm looking for a place to live." She's like, "Oh, come into my humble abode and let me show you this duplex." And she notices him like staring at the little boy, like super creepy. And he notices her noticing him and decides to just act like he's staring off into space. So he's just kind of like, and she lets it go. Like, he thinks he's going to be confronted for a second, and she lets it go. Which I'm sure is, like, a power play to him, too. He's like, I get to be creepy, and just, like, she doesn't even know what I'm doing. At this point, he heads back to Idaho, hoping to get some sleep before stalking the Groene home the following morning. So, he goes and gets some sleep. He shows back up the next morning, I think probably, like, 2 a.m. or something. He walks up to their deck, and he just walks right up to it. So if you look at the pictures of the house, it's kind of just a house plopped around a big field. And when you're driving down the freeway, you literally are like, oh, that's the Groene house. So he literally just walks right up to it. He notices dog bowls and he peeks through the window, which I don't think that they had curtains, probably because they lived... there was just a bunch of space around them, but they had the plastic on the window, like in older houses, to keep
that in winter.
You keep the warm air in. And so he like peeks through a window and he sees the 2 kids sleeping. At this point, the dog must have smelled him, because the dog kind of like saunters into the room and just stares at him. And he says that it's not until he blinks at the dog that he starts like going fucking crazy. And so, of course, Joseph Duncan is like, oh, fuck, and like, blah, 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 like into the bushes, like a little bitch. Yeah. He decides to go back to his Jeep and park it on the hill across from the freeway. So if you're on the freeway, there's a hill over here and right at Coeur d'Alene Lake, and then on the left is their house. So he's looking across the freeway. He puts on a camo jacket, which I actually think was like a blanket. He's just creeping on the family, and he finds that the Groene family has 2 young kids, a teenager, a mother, and a man who's assumed to be either their father or her husband or boyfriend. It gets dark again, everyone goes to sleep, and he once again creeps onto the property, just walks right up to the house. He's wearing gloves, and he's wearing thrifted shoes that are a few sizes too big for his feet. And he has prepared a few zip ties like handcuffs that have already been wiped down. He also wiped down the bullets he's placed into the 12-gauge shotgun he's holding.
But this is ballsier for him, because you've got 2...
And a man in the house.
2 parents, one of which is a man, and a teenage son.
Yeah, those are 2 major complications in this sitch. The chamber was actually filled with bird shot for the dogs, which I assume is used to kill birds. So he didn't want to kill them, but he just wanted to scare them away, I guess. So that was the first bullet. But he also had 2 slugs for the parents if they were going to prevent him from taking the children. So the thing that was so creepy about him was he, again, stalked moms or whole families with the intention of killing the parents and stealing these kids. He's like standing in their front lawn and he tells himself that if he goes to their back door and it's locked, that he would take it as like a sign from God that he wasn't going to go
Why
do
do
it.
these people do this?
Their lock had been broken on the back door for months. He goes in through the back door. He first sees Brenda, who's asleep on the couch. He walks past her, specifically seeking out the man of the house. The dogs do confront him at this point. I don't know why I picture this, but I picture them like at the end of a hallway.
That was kind of how I was picturing
Yeah,
it,
and
too.
they're kind of like, they see the gun and they're like, and like immediately run and like hide under a bed in a bedroom. But this wakes up everybody in the house.
Yeah.
Brenda has fallen asleep in the living room with a lamp on, and her eyes have been adjusted to the dark because she's been sleeping. So she's like trying to see what's happening, and she turns off the lamp hoping to like be able to see better. She's like, oh my God, this is a guy with a gun. He's like, where's the man of the house? And for some reason she's like, what? She's like asleep, right? She's like, what? And he's like, where is the man of the house? And she's like, he's upstairs. He's upstairs sleeping. And he leads her up the stairs, holding the gun to her. And she's like, what the fuck is happening? I can't see. Like, what? Duncan takes her upstairs to her sleeping boyfriend, Mark McKenzie. Side note, my name was supposed to be Mackenzie. Duncan tells Brenda to put the zip ties onto his wrists and ankles and forces them down the stairs, which is weird to me that he does this before the stairs because poor Mark McKenzie is like hobbling down the stairs.
Yeah.
And apparently the room next to their bedroom was full of like
Guns and ammo.
And he said he was just trying to make it so that Duncan couldn't see that room. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can like come back and, you know, like he knows they're in there. So he's just trying to keep him like away from that room. And this whole time Duncan is like, I'm just here to rob you. You know, everyone fucking says that. I'm just here to rob you. And they're like, okay, fuck. Well, he's saying, I'm just gonna rob you. Mark is like, dude, I have like a new truck. Just like, there are my keys. Go take my truck, take my wallet, whatever. At this point, they're back downstairs in the living room, and Duncan tells Brenda to tell all the kids to come into the living room. And the oldest, Slade, talks back because it's 2 a.m. His mom is like, Slade, get down here. And he's like, Mom, it's fucking 2 a.m. I don't want to. And she's like, get your ass down the stairs. And he comes out of his bedroom and he sees the situation and he's like, fuck. And so he runs down the stairs to his mom, and the mother also binds his hands behind him. Duncan tells her to demand the younger children to come into the living room as well, where he zip ties them and Brenda.
Where I feel like, I don't know, like I can't say what I would do in that situation, because I'm obviously not, but as a parent, like, would you call your kid downstairs?
I don't know. It's so hard when they're saying, I'm just gonna rob you. I would probably think,
okay, I just need to do whatever they say.
Yeah, and he's going to, like, the chances of him finding the kids are very probable. So I feel like maybe if I say, like, okay, they're gonna come down here, I don't know. The younger kids come down the living room. He zip ties them and Brenda. Although he's an idiot and he can't do math, so he didn't bring enough fucking zip ties. So he has to use duct tape. So, he has them all lie on the floor, and then he takes Slade into the backyard. He strikes him on the back of the head with a framing hammer. And he leaves Slade in the grass, presumably dead.
Okay, so wait. So this is the blunt force trauma that all of these prior victims keep having.
We assume,
He's probably, so his
doing the
weapon
same.
of choice is a hammer. Okay, second of all, if he has these parents bound, like, why did he need to kill them? He could still have kidnapped the children.
I don't know. I forgot to say too, Slade is 13. He then took 8-year-old Shasta and put her into Mark's truck. He tells her to lay down in the truck while he goes inside to retrieve her 9-year-old brother Dylan. When he returns to the truck with Dylan, he sees that Shasta did not listen to what he was saying. And he was like, I fucking told you to lay down. And so he puts Dylan in the truck and he's like, both of you lay down. If you don't, I'm gonna kill you. He leaves the kids in the truck and goes back into the house to deal with the parents. You're right. I mean, at this point, he could have just left. This is like making me shake. I don't know why, but when I was writing this, it just gave me such like, because I remember driving by her house to go camping, and I remember she was still missing when it was happening. And I remember my mom saying that's the house that it happened at, and they still haven't found her. And it gives me like the
Shasta,
most
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She was still actively missing at the time. It's literally making my hands shake. It's creeping me out. And I don't respond like this to true crime, but ugh. Seriously.
Well, it's, they affect you differently when it's like so
Close to home. He goes in, he strikes both parents with the framing hammer multiple times and heads back out to the truck, where he sees now both children sitting up in the truck. And they're like kind of staring at the bushes. And that's when they see 13-year-old Slade walking after being hit with a goddamn framing hammer in his skull. He was trying to get the kids out of the truck. And they're bound. I think he's bound. And I think again, their yard is so big, and it said that the truck was parked a ways away and he was in the back of the house. So I think he was trying to help Shasta, and that's why she was sitting up. And then he's like, cooperate, I'm gonna go hide for a second.
Right.
And like, it kills me when they almost had it. When Duncan sees Slade walking, he tells the children to lay down again, walks back over to him, and hits him in the head with the hammer a second time. He drives Mark's truck back to his Jeep, and then he heads east on the freeway. So
Did he switch cars? Or?
Yeah, so he's driving the husband's car, and he goes back to his stolen Jeep and has the kids in the Jeep now. And then he starts heading east on the freeway. Slade is a motherfucking angel, and holy fuck, he's a tough fucking kid. He gets up a second time. He gets up from the bushes and attempts to go through the front door, but it was locked. Oh my god, this is making me so uncomfortable. Okay. My hands can't stop shaking. It's
Do you
really
want me to
bugging
read it?
No. I don't know why I'm responding like this. It's like...
You look like you're full-blown having a panic attack.
Ah! He attempts to go through the front door, but it was locked, so he went through the back door. And they found blood all over the house, so they found that he was, like, looking in the bedrooms and stuff for his brother and sister. And he went into his bedroom and grabbed a blanket and then laid it on top of his mom and then laid next to his mom and died there.
Oh.
That's like a rough one. Ooh!
Did he call anyone, or he just went and got a blanket and laid down
I
next
think
to
he
his mom and
probably like couldn't find the kids, and I think he just was like, everybody's gone, I'm gonna die here. Like, I think I'm like he's like, I mean,
died? Yeah.
I think he just knew, and so his last thing was,
Oh, that is.
hi. How are you?
No, how are you?
Why?
'Cause
Or did Lindsey tell you that I was having a freak out?
you're having a panic attack.
I was?
Yes.
Oh, is that
Yes.
what that was? That was a rough one.
You should have called me up earlier.
I didn't know that was a thing that people do.
Yeah.
Why? I didn't know that. I don't think I realized that's what that was. Is that what that was?
Do you mind if I
Panic
put my
attack?
hand on your chest?
That was just a really rough part. Mark Mackenzie was also not dead, by the way. There wasn't a whole bunch of stuff about it. It just said it appeared as though he tried to stand up, but then he fell back down and he broke the table behind him. Police were notified the following day, May 16th. The neighbor of the family had like gone over or called. I think he called to pay Slade for mowing his field the day before. And after seeing Mark's truck parked behind the barn with all the doors left open, and then he went around to the front and there was blood on the front door, he was like, this is spook. So he called the police. So an officer comes out. He sees the blood on the front door. He walks around to the back and he sees that the back door is open and covered in a lot more blood. Upon closer look, he can see Brenda face down on the floor next to Slade and Mark, and immediately he's like, holy fuck, there's 3 dead people in here. Like, send everybody. And at this point, they're hoping the kids have just escaped. They're like, okay, the 2 younger kids are missing. Maybe they ran and they're hiding in the woods somewhere. So they notify next of kin when they realize that Mark is not the father of the children, which sucks because that means it takes like a couple days for them to notify next of kin, for the DNA and everything to come in. When they rule out their father, Steve, because of course, you know, the husband always did it, whatever, yeah. So they are able to immediately rule him out. He has an alibi. And then an Amber Alert was issued. So it had, at this point, been delayed. I don't know how long it was, but delayed. And then because this was in Idaho, it took even longer for it to happen in Washington. And again, for anyone here, Coeur d'Alene and Spokane are basically the same place, but like that would make a huge difference if there wasn't an Amber Alert in Washington also, because you know,
we were so close to the state line.
Yeah. While police are investigating, the autopsies on both adults come back and they find that the murder weapon was in fact a framing hammer and not a gun as they had originally thought. Their skulls were so destroyed that they thought they were shot. At first glance, people thought the crime was actually committed by a local biker gang, which I thought was really random until I watched a video and saw that her father was actually like a motorcycle. Like, I know. I was like, why would you just assume it's like a biker gang? What a weird thing. And then also, Shasta and Dylan actually had two older brothers that were also kind of involved in some sketchy stuff. It didn't really go into detail, just kind of stuff. They were like, maybe this was like a bad drug deal or something. So nobody ever assumed that someone would massacre an entire family to steal two kids. Yeah. So the only thing that makes sense is some weird biker gang shit. Duncan took these children to a forest in Montana. It would be weeks until they were seen again. He would abuse them in every possible way that I will not list. But he would explain in graphic detail to the kids about how he killed their parents. And he also told other stories about children that he had killed and raped. He was always more aggressive to Dylan, who is the older of the two. He physically beat him more and was found to also be sexually abused and tortured. If Duncan ever wanted to leave this site, he was basically like a camping site. I don't know like where he was getting shelter or any fucking thing like that. He was just like in a camping site somewhere. And if he wanted to leave, he would chain them to like a tree. Like just chain them up out there. And I don't laugh because it's funny. I laugh when I'm uncomfortable and because that's a fucking terrible thing. So at some point during the trip, he relocates them to an abandoned cabin where he records 3 separate videos. The first 2 videos were of Duncan sexually assaulting Dylan. And the third video was basically it's another trigger. This is like a very specific one. So, it showed Dylan, the 9-year-old, hanging with wire while Duncan railed at God and alternately sang, screamed, and pleasured himself while Dylan was like writhing in pain. He said, "If there is a God, then I pray with all the love I can muster. If you're not real, you know why this is happening. That doesn't even make sense. God, this child, this boy does not deserve to die." That's what he says in the beginning of the third video. It's just like rambling nonsense. Yeah. Even though Shasta was the younger sister of the two, she is the one like convincing Dylan to hold out hope because he is basically like, I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna die. Like,
I feel like I want to die.
You would just, he's like, he's totally giving up. And she's like, just hold out hope a little bit longer. She starts to learn about Duncan's life. I think she kind of, I don't know if she did it, I mean, because you're so traumatized, you know, or because she was like being really smart about it and was like, maybe I'll learn about him to create like a
rapport.
Mm-hmm. And so she basically kind of tried to like befriend him. She's like, tell me about yourself. Smart 8-year-old kid. She talks about his family, his personal interests. They kind of start becoming friends. A week after the cabin video was made, Shasta is on one side of the truck that they're in. They're traveling somewhere and hears Duncan's shotgun go off. She runs around the Jeep to find her brother Dylan bleeding in his abdomen and screaming.
Wait, he just shot Dylan?
Mm-hmm. She sees him hold the barrel of the shotgun to his head, and when he pulls the trigger, the gun makes a click sound and doesn't fire. The fucker reloads the shotgun in front of the 2 kids as Dylan is like bleeding on the ground, and she's like, please don't kill my brother, like please don't shoot him again. And he like takes the time to like reload it and shoots Dylan and kills him. Duncan immediately starts crying, telling Shasta that it was an accident and he only killed him so that he wouldn't suffer anymore. And like later in court, he says some stupid bullshit like he was cleaning the gun, you know, went off accidentally. You fucking loser. A few days after Dylan's death, and like again, it kind of sounds weird because she's like befriending him, but like at this point he's killed her brother, so she's like not speaking to him, right? She's like, you fucking killed my brother, don't talk to me, whatever. A few days later, Duncan asks Shasta how she wants to die. He says, do you want to be shot like your brother, where it'll hurt really bad, but it'll be really quick? Or I can strangle you, and it will hurt, but it will take more time. And this genius child says, strangle me, because she knows that it takes longer, and she thinks that if she can, like, convince him not to do it, that she'll make it out alive. And that is exactly what happens, which I just think is wild. He ties a rope around her neck and starts to strangle her, and she begs him to stop, and it's not until she calls him his douchey nickname, Jazzy Jet. She says, Jet, please, please stop. And he stops. On July 2nd, 2005, 7 weeks after the abduction, he's had her for 2 months. This fucking idiot decides to take Shasta into a Dennys in Coeur d'Alene at 2 o'clock in the morning. And now that I know all this information, I kind of think maybe she, like, convinced him in an unknowing way to, like, turn himself in. And instead of just turning himself in, he was like, we're going to go to a Dennys. Because what happened was the server was like, the dynamic between this little girl and this dude is super creep-tastic, and I don't like it. And she's like, doesn't she kind of look like that girl on, like, all the missing posters? And she goes into the back and she calls her manager and like another coworker, and they're like, hey, do you think like that looks like that missing girl? And they're like, yeah, I'm like pretty sure that's her. Immediately call the police. When they enter the building, they see Joseph immediately whisper something into Shasta's ear, and then an officer walks right towards her and says, what is your name? And she says, Shasta Groene. And she starts immediately crying. The officers tell Duncan to stand up, and they place him under arrest. He's very calm. He totally is respectful. They tell the server, they're like, stay with her. We're going to go put him in the car. And then, so the server is like with her, and she says, your brother Dylan, like, where is he? Hoping he's like in the car or something. And she says, my brother Dylan is in heaven with my mom and my brother. Ugh. And then she said that Jet was taking her back to her dad because he changed his mind about killing her too, and she taught him how to love again. Doesn't that just kill your insides? Doesn't that just, ugh. Shasta is immediately taken to the Kootenai County Medical Center while her father is notified of her safe recovery. And he, at the time, was in Tacoma because it was the 4th of July and he had family over there. When they called, he immediately got in his car and drove. And it's about a 7-hour drive. So, on July 4th, 2005... 2 days after Shasta's recovery, park rangers discover a makeshift camping spot where they find charred human bone fragments. They send the fragments to Quantico for analysis, but it's immediately assumed to be Dylan Groene. The community came together to celebrate what would have been his 10th birthday 2 weeks later. A week after the arrest, Duncan is charged with... Now we get into the good stuff, because now he's getting punished. So we're all just going to shake it out. Fuck, man. It's just
my
like...
My arms are still like... Ooh.
I have never in my life had a reaction like that to true crime. Ever. That was like... A week after the arrest, Joseph Duncan is charged with 3 counts of first-degree kidnapping and first-degree murder in the name of Slade Groene, Brenda Groene, and Mark McKenzie. Shasta and Dylan's cases were to be determined by the federal courts because Duncan had crossed state lines with minors for the purposes of sexual exploitation. The family of Mark McKenzie actually went on to sue the county in Minnesota that released Duncan with such a low bail amount originally. Like, they're like, he fucking shouldn't have even had the chance to do this. Yeah. I'm not really sure if it was awarded. I kind of assume it was, but I don't know. The trial ended up being delayed 3 times because there were mental competency hearings. His attorneys were constantly requesting more time. Joseph finally decides to pull a Ted Bundy and dismiss his attorneys entirely and just represent himself like a fucking idiot. Duncan pleads guilty to the charges on Brenda, Mark, and Slade with the agreement that he will serve 3 consecutive life sentences, which is strategic for the prosecution because the federal jury now will decide if he'll be sentenced to death or not. So the state doesn't even like try for the death sentence, or like the federal case is like a huge one. Yeah. During the trial, it was decided that Shasta would not have to testify because he was representing himself. They did not want to give him the opportunity to be able to cross-examine her. Duncan is indicted by a federal grand jury for 10 counts of kidnapping resulting in death, aggravated sexual abuse of a minor, sexual exploitation of a child resulting in death, and other gun and vehicle-related crimes. They were not fucking around with this guy. They were like, fuck this guy. The 3 cabin videos were supposed to be shown to the jurors at trial, and Shasta's father was pissed.
Yeah,
He said, absolutely not. He said, I don't want any. He asked the judge, please don't let anybody except the jurors be in the courtroom. He's like, this is child pornography of my kid. Like, please don't do that. He also asked that the windows to the courtroom be closed. He filed a motion with the court asking the judge to reconsider keeping the courtroom open. The judge denied the motion, instead telling everyone if they couldn't control their emotions while the video was being shown that they should not go into the courtroom. The jurors were obviously offered counseling, which is not uncommon in situations like this. And the state, actually, because of this trial, ended up increasing the amount of money that's allocated to therapy and rehab for victims of crimes such as these.
I feel like if I had been on that jury, I would have been one of those people like, I'm sorry, judge, I'm one of the people that can't control my emotions while watching this. Like,
Sorry,
I would prefer not to come into the courtroom. Just read me like a transcript of what happens. That's bad enough. I don't think I could. I really don't think I could handle watching that.
I don't think I could.
Duncan pleads guilty to all 10 counts, and after only 3 hours of deliberation, the jury recommends the death penalty, and the judge in the case sentenced
Why did the jury even have to be?
Because whether that he
or they
got,
found him
it was the
guilty?
death penalty or not.
Oh,
if
got
it
it.
deserved,
Yeah.
I think the death penalty, right?
Yeah. And 3 hours is like nothing for a death penalty case. Like, holy fuck. On January 18th, 2007, the same day Duncan was indicted in federal court, Riverside County officials announced that Duncan was also charged in Anthony Martinez's murder, the one from Riverside County, California. Riverside officials were able to match a partial fingerprint on the duct tape he used, and so they were like, okay, well, he admitted to it, and also there's proof, so fuck you. So he would also be facing a murder charge in California. On November 3rd, 2008, because remember, at this point, they're just cold cases. November 3rd, 2008, Duncan was sentenced to an additional 3 federal life sentences for kidnapping Shasta Groene and for sexually abusing and murdering Dylan Groene. Because he's all over. Right. Yeah, the one was in California. The 2 girls were in Seattle. Yeah. The Groenes were in Idaho. So he had crazy amounts of counts against him because he was in all the jurisdictions. March 15th, 2011, Duncan pleaded guilty to Anthony Martinez's murder. He also confesses to murdering the 2 girls in Seattle, which they found to be 11-year-old Sammy Jo White and the half-sister Carmen Cubias, although he couldn't remember their motherfucking names. In all, Duncan was convicted in Idaho for kidnapping and murdering the 3 victims in Coeur d'Alene, for which he was given 6 life sentences. In federal court for kidnapping Shasta and Dylan Groene and murdering Dylan, for which he was given 3 death sentences and 3 life sentences, and in the state of California for kidnapping and murdering Martinez, for which he was given 2 life sentences. They did not fuck around with this guy. A trust fund was started in Shasta's name, and a home began being built for her that they were entrusting to her until she was 25. And as she got older, again, she's my age. I think we were born in the same year or within a year. So as she got older, I remember, like I said, seeing her out at places, and she actually, there's a news video of her doing a fundraiser for a local animal shelter, and she's always known as the girl who was kidnapped and lived. And so they're like, she's turning it into something great. She loved animals. She would later enact a petition called Dylan and Slade's Law, which would reduce the amount of strikes sexual offenders could receive, and she was asking for it to be lowered from 3 strikes to 1 strike, and it was approved. So Dylan and Slade's Law is a law in Idaho. So Joseph was incarcerated at the Terre Haute Correctional Center, where he still blogged, by the way. Shasta later said that when he whispered into her ear at Dennys, he was telling her he hoped that she would come visit him in prison. In March 2021, it was reported that Duncan was suffering from stage 4 brain cancer. Court filings revealed he underwent brain surgery in October of 2020 after being diagnosed with a glioblastoma. He declined treatment from either chemotherapy or radiation therapy. In November 2020, medical staff at the Federal Bureau of Prisons estimated he had between 6 and 12 months left to live. And he died on March 28th, 2021 at the age of 58.
Well, and it's like to go, to be kidnapped, to have to survive several months with this guy, to watch, the murder of your brother at 8, and then to basically become almost a local celebrity.
Yeah.
because you survived. And I mean, when I just Googled her, every article is like 8-year-old that survived kidnapping and you know.
I'd move.
Like that just, I feel like that would really fuck with your
I would
identity.
change my name and I would move.
Yeah, I don't like any of this. I really feel like I need to go home
Take
and
a shower.
Take a shower, like with a salt scrub, and
So we're gonna
smudge myself, get my rattle out.
Keeping up appearances.
I'm gonna watch Sister Wives when I get home.
So wholesome.
Paint a picture.
I don't know. I physically feel ill. I'm not pleased.
So now we're all gonna go watch Happy Things and eat some leftover Chinese food.
Get high later and cry.
And like I said, I don't usually have reactions like that ever. And I remember feeling it last night when I wrote that part that he was found next to his mom, and I was like,
see, now you're talking about, so I'm feeling her. So when Mama came up here and was like, you know, kind of like rubbing your chest, I was anxious here. And just as you were talking again, it's here. It's like,
here. I can like feel it. I know. Every time my therapist asks where that is, it's always in my chest.
Good.
Okay, well, I'm going to go watch Sister Wives now.
So I was listening to our episode last week and your teacher's sign off. And I really do think that we should make that like our official sign off.
Cool. All right, everyone. I'm going to go watch Sister Wives.
I'm going to go, I don't know.
Do literally anything else?
Yeah.
Lindsay's going to get stoned and cry.
Yeah.
And
I might need a cocktail and a salt bath.
Thank you. Love you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode. We put out new episodes every single Wednesday, and if you're impatient like me, be sure to become a Patreon where you can get your episodes early each week. For as little as $5 a month, you not only significantly support the production of this podcast, but you'll also get ad-free episodes in addition to them being early. For pictures, videos, and links related to this episode, be sure to check out our Instagram at 3sacrime. And for more information, go to 3sacrime.com.